Aloha, and welcome to another session of A Better Day. I'm State Senator Sam Slom, and I hope you'll join us for the next half hour because I think we have an interesting and informative program. We've got two wonderful guests, and here we are. We've come out of the 2014 legislative session. Whew, it's been a long time since January. We just closed May 1st, and now the yelling, the screaming, and the gnashing of teeth begins for those people that didn't get what they wanted from the budget or from you, because only the taxpayers can pay for all this. It was an interesting session. In many ways, it was kind of quiet. There were some controversial issues at the beginning, but not so much near the end. We went into conference committee, and a lot of the bills were decided. A few of them didn't make it on the final day of the session. And we'll do a wrap-up probably next time in more detail about some of the more controversial issues. But it was interesting when we started out back in January, and as usual, people were talking about, marijuana and physician-assisted suicide and gambling and some of those other things, and you know what? They never made it. We talk a lot about things that are really not that important, because the most important things, particularly to you and your family, are jobs, the economy, and taxes. And we saw yet again during this legislative session that despite the optimism by the governor and others that our economy, in fact, had turned around, it was picking up steam and all that, it wasn't justified by the figures that were released. And the Council of Revenues in March of this year had downgraded their forecast, and that had an adverse effect on budget. But we still were able to spend nearly $24 billion on an operating supplemental budget for the next 2 years. And the legislature did not balance the 4 years after that. So we continue to alert you to the fact that this state is still struggling with an unfunded liability of over $20 billion. When I say unfunded liability, it means that it is a liability on taxpayers of the state, mostly for the state employees' retirement system, both retirees and current employees, and also for the employees' health care system. But we've got so many other programs that cost a lot of money, and they get more costly each year. And then every year we add even more programs. And every time we turn around and we add something and somebody says, well, that's a good idea, but it also has a price tag to it. And often we don't know the total price until years later. It starts out with maybe a modest fee, maybe even a study. But it all translates into more money, and there's only one source of that money, and that is you. And I know that many of you, most of you, are probably struggling and not better off than you were several years ago. So we're going to have to come to grips with that in our community and in our state. We're going to have to develop alternative means of raising money, of having job creation, and really diversifying our economy. We talk about diversity, we talk about racial diversity, but we don't talk about economic diversity, and that's what we really need to do. So we'll keep an eye on those things. You keep an eye on us. And just a reminder, the reason that we call this program A Better Day, well, the governor, when he was elected 4 years ago, he started using the term a new day. And I say to you that every day we get up, which is pretty lucky if you do get up every day, it's a new day. What we want and what we're entitled to in Hawaii is a better day. We should have a better day economically and socially and politically too. It's going to be a very interesting summer. We have the 2014 elections, and now that the legislature is over, a lot of the candidates are going to start campaigning in earnest. They actually have until next month, till June 2nd, to file papers, so there may be some late surprises. But we know that several members of the legislature are running for office. State Senator Willis Sparrow and State Representative K. Mark Takai are among a group of majority party members that are running for the U.S. Congress. And so is the Senate President, Donna Mercado Kim. So we're going to see a lot of activity. There's going to be a lot of money spent. People that get rich will be those that take advertising and those that print bumper stickers and potholders and signs and things like that. I want you to get involved, though. This is going to be a very important election for you, because what happens in the legislature next year is going to be determined who comes to the legislature. If you like what's happening, re-elect the same people. If you want some changes, then re-elect some, or elect some different people, because if you keep re-electing the same people, you're going to get the same results. I think the most disappointing thing for me during this 27th state legislature, this session, was the fact that there was no more transparency to government and no more empowerment. The bills to allow you to have tools such as initiative, referendum, recall, and term limits, none of them even got a hearing this year. And that's important. It's important because Hawaii is the most limited state in terms of the tools that the voters have. And I think there's a direct connection as to why our voter total continued to decline, so that in our last election we only had 48% of people eligible come out and vote. It was the lowest in the nation. That's embarrassing. We used to be number one. We started out after statehood, and everybody was excited about voting and getting involved. And now, not so much. Well, part of it is the fault of the parties not having adequate candidates, particularly the Republican Party, because they don't even cover all of the races. They allow majority members to walk into offices. Well, that takes away from things. And then there's the attitude by people that, oh, my vote doesn't count. You tell that to the people that have won or lost by 1 or 2 or a handful of votes. Your vote does count, and you can make a difference, but you got to be involved, and you got to be like that old salesman that went door to door and got rejection a lot of times. You're not going to get everything you want, but if you don't participate at all, you won't get anything. So we count on you to be involved, to be voting, to run for office yourself, you still have time, or to help a candidate do so. Anyway, it was an interesting session, but as I say, it was different from a lot of the previous sessions. Not that much drama. A lot of the, I guess, the final votes and the final discussion had to do with the battle over an increased minimum wage, which almost all businesses warned against. You pass minimum wage, you're going to destroy jobs, you're going to destroy the opportunity for people that need that as an entry or training wage, not a living wage, but just to get your foot in the door. You got to have a job to get experience and to move up the ladder. And there were bills that had to do with land development, and particularly Kaka'ako. My gosh, there are already 37 major high-rise projects along the Kapiolani Boulevard and Lower Makai borders in Kaka'ako. And the big deal was about whether or not OHA was going to be able to develop the land that it got in exchange for the land demands over the years, the $200 million worth, and that was very controversial. There were also other bills that were controversial, including the naming of a state instrument, and we didn't get that. The school kids are going to have an opportunity to vote on that, as they did back in the mid-'80s on the state fish. And it's interesting because there were so many candidates for state instrument. They're going to break it down into state stringed instrument and non-stringed instrument. Maybe this is an opportunity for our bat. We can have the state winged native mammal, right? Somewhere our native bat got sidelined a couple of years ago. Caught in politics, because everything in this building, in the big square building, has to do with politics. We had a lot of visitors this year. Maybe you came down. Maybe a class or your kids came down to the Capitol. I wish more people would come down, not only to visit, but also to come to the hearings or sit in the gallery and listen to the debate when it occurs. Because it's important that you know what's going on, and it's important that you hold our feet to the fire. So anyway, that's it. As I said, we'll take a look in the days and weeks ahead in more detail about what actually came out of the 2014 legislature and how much it's going to cost you and all that. Well, I got two really bright young people with me today who are going to give you and me their perspective on the legislature. And so first of all, I'd like to welcome and welcome back Noelani Bonifacio, who worked in my office. Actually, she was here last year and she came back again. You're a glutton for punishment, right?
I guess so.
I guess so, must be. And Timothy Sutton, who's a young attorney. He had just taken the bar. And what's the story with the Hawaii bar? How long do you have to wait for the results?
Months. Many months.
And you took it, when did you take it?
In February.
In February, and you're still waiting.
Yep.
You're still waiting.
Approximately May or June.
How many people take the Hawaii bar each year?
At least 75 or more each year.
Are there 2 sessions, 2 times to take it?
In the nation, for consistency, there's one in February and then there's one in July.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But are we one of the last states in terms of getting the results?
The exact dates, not certain, but I would say that we're that we're cutting it close to being the last, if not one of the last.
So tell us a little bit about you. Give us a Timothy 101, your background, and why you went into the law instead of selling Twinkies or something like that.
It's not a very interesting story, but I'm from here. I'm from Kaneohe originally, and I graduated from UH Manoa in Chinese language, and then I took some time off to go explore the world and was a manager at a small business in Los Angeles in food and beverage industry. And after that, I was actually a witness in some lawsuits. I had some former employees of the company have some grievances I helped them out with, and some social justice things came about with worker issues and labor issues. And I thought to myself, I had an interest in law back at UH, and now that I'm living in California, it's too far to go home for law school, so I'll just stay here and go to law school. And I went to Southwestern Law School in LA and sat for the bar, and then moved home right after. So ended up back here anyway.
And here you are, right? Yeah. So now you've been our session attorney.
Correct.
This year, and we're trying to find a way of keeping you on, keep you regularly. But what would you like to do?
I'd like to stay on that path. I think that what you touched on earlier about getting the vote out, I was actually in a meeting for one of the Alumni Association events at my school, at my law school, and Sandra Day O'Connor was the speaker. And she has a website called civics.org, and it's all about civic engagement and getting young people, especially, to vote and getting them to know about their state legislatures and the U.S. Congress and their U.S. justice system, the federal justice system. And I think that's extremely important for lawyers to do. If you don't practice in the courtroom, you practice law in your daily life. You help people get involved in this process, whether it's to come down to the Senate minority and learn about how we draft legislation, or to get involved in hearings and submitting testimony. That's really important. Well,
you also volunteered, didn't you, for DLNR, the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Tell us about that. What were you doing?
When I was making the move home, I was researching a lot about what the hot legal issues are in the past decade since I've been gone from the state. And one of the ones that was personal to me, because I grew up here and I'm a waterman, a skin diver and bodyboarder, surfer, sailor, everything, is water issues. So the DLNR had a case that actually had another development today, the Navaeha case, the Maui for Waters case. The court actually came down with a settlement and agreement with DLNR, but I've been following that issue and been helping the Water Resource Management Commission.
And you did that just as a volunteer?
Yeah, as a volunteer, and I think I encourage everybody in the state to do that, to get involved in state agency work and in politics in any way they can. If they care about the environment or they care about an issue, just follow up with someone. Call your office, call any legislator's office and say, how can I help? Or call an agency, and they're more than willing to get you involved.
Well, that's great. Well, you did a good job for the Senate minority, and I hope you had enough to do. You didn't get bored, did you?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not one day.
That's one good thing, because we get involved in just about everything, right? Yep. Being on all the committees and everything, so it gives you an opportunity to do that. Well, Noelani, you were on last year. You were on this program before, right? And now you're older and wiser and all that. Although some would question that because you decided to come back and help me, and you did. What do you see as the difference between when you were here, first session 2013 and the 2014 session?
Well, like you said, there hasn't been that much controversy. Last year we talked about the sugary beverage tax, 1 cent per ounce. We talked about banning styrofoam containers. We talked about bag taxes. We talked about GMOs, which we did touch on this year, but again, it didn't get through.
Not to the extent as the past year.
No.
Right? Yeah.
So I noticed that there was a lot less controversial issues discussed, and my view on that is because it's an election year. People don't want to create too much controversy. The biggest thing that's happened since the end of last session was the same-sex marriage. And the reason I believe that it was done in October with a special session instead of during the legislative session, January to May, is because people would have a longer time to forget about it. They would have a year.
Before the election.
Before the election. Whereas everything that's discussed during this legislative session, January to May, there's only 6 months for people to forget about it. So I think people were trying not to rock the boat and to keep things calm. So there wasn't too much controversy this year.
At least above the surface.
Right.
Behind closed doors,
issues,
always.
Yes, of course.
Right. Now, you have a very interesting background because you're a local girl and you graduated UH.
Yes.
And tell us about some of the other things that you've done in the last couple of years.
Right. So I graduated from the University of Hawaii in political science. And while I was in college, I did an internship with Walt Disney World. After I graduated college, I worked on the 2012 Mitt Romney presidential campaign, and I've been with you for the last 2 years. So that's my background.
Yeah, you had a little bit of retailing.
Yes, I did work in retail at home.
And now everybody's going to see Noelani soon because she's the stage of screen TV. You were on 5-0?
Yes, Hawaii 5-0 twice, and then an untitled Cameron Crowe project that's coming out in December.
Right,
and
what else? What else?
I also did some extra work for Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
So that will come out in over a year.
See, and they say the minority doesn't have any clout in this community, right? But both of you are going to do very well. Well, that's great. Yeah, it was interesting. It was a different session from the two, and I absolutely, of course, agree with you about the same-sex marriage issue. That's why people wanted it during a regular session, so it would get full coverage and all that. Instead, it was all by the numbers. Everything was decided before we went into special session. It went just as planned. Even though there were 10,000 people down here, the votes, not one vote changed, and that was it, and then we could move on. Now the proponents were saying, well, if it would have been during a regular session, it would have gotten lost with other legislation and all that. Well, I don't know if it would have gotten lost, but it certainly would have gotten more of an opportunity for being vetted and things like that. You think the voters, both of you, think the voters are going to forget certain things by August, the primary, and November, the general this year?
I sure hope not. You know, hopefully people who came down to the Capitol saw a little bit about how the legislative process works and, you know, about the different senators and their ways of handling hearings, and hopefully they remember that come November, because a lot of people were against same-sex marriage and they felt as if their voices were not heard or they weren't listened to.
Their voices weren't heard, right?
Exactly.
And then they had no recourse. We were talking about empowerment, the initiative, referendum, and recall.
And all of those died.
And I know a lot of politicians are hoping that they will forget or not think about it. And that's a shame. And I don't want to, you know, just dwell on this one issue. It's a shame from my standpoint, as you both know, because of the fiscal issues and the impact. And I'm frankly extremely concerned that we have not changed our direction in terms of taxation and spending and debt to try to provide more opportunities. Now look, both of you are young. Both of you are involved in social networking and things like that. All we heard during the 2008 national election was that Barack Obama became president because of the renewed interest of young people in social networking. I don't think there's any doubt that there was a lot of social networking going on, but what have you seen during the, you know, since 2008? Because there seems to be a fall-off of young people being involved and engaged. What do you see? What do you think?
Well, I personally see timelines change, and there's a lot more with non-political postings and things that are maybe semi-political, more social. So a lot of more social movements, particularly with GMO. It's a hot issue, a lot of people talking about that, but it's not necessarily supporting or favoring one candidate or one party or anything political behind that message. So that's where the trend has been going. And I think that something to do with that might have been the White House releases, maybe the style that they did it, or they captured a certain time where more people were going on Facebook or going on Twitter, and maybe there's not so much of a spark of an interest many years later.
Do both of you get your news or information primarily from the social media rather than, say, network television or radio? Or newspapers, God forbid, you'd pick up a newspaper.
I think big stories, that's usually how we find out about them, is through social media. But I do watch cable news once in a while, mostly because it's on at my house.
I don't think I'm average. I think I read a paper from every part of the country, and then I read international papers, so I don't get any news from the social media. I get news about family and friends, which I think is really important, but I'm probably guilty of spending more time reading syndicated papers.
Now you have a family, right?
I'd have a bunch of little four-legged kids. I have little
But I mean, you're married, you have a family. Do you look at things differently? I mean, when you're, carefree and younger and all that, you look at things, is there a progression in how you looked at different issues and all?
When I turned 30, I started thinking about retirement, which is, I know, crazy, but that's when, I feel guilty almost for not starting earlier thinking about retirement. And I think when you start to talk about retirement and your plan for the future, that's when your mindset changes and you think, hey, these things really do matter. All these issues, long-term goals now instead of short-term. So yeah, things change at that point.
Are you thinking of your retirement yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
And you know, I do think that the general public, in terms of young people, I think that getting involved, and Barack Obama getting a lot of young voters to turn out, that was, I don't want to put it this way, but a fad. A lot of people were doing it because their friends were getting involved or their friends were interested in the campaign, and I think that's why a lot of people got involved. But there are a lot of young people who are very concerned, you know, with the Snowden and with there's a lot of issues, like you said, GMO, a lot of issues that young people do care about and they are passionate about. And I did go to the Conservative Political Action Conference in March, and there are lots of conservative young people and lots of young people in general who are very involved and they want to get involved. I think they just don't understand how to do it, or maybe they're not talking to their friends to get them involved. But I do hope that there are a lot of young people who will become more involved and start to vote.
And yet, statistically, young people still have the lowest of the low percentage, right, of getting involved. You mentioned about it may have been a fad back in 2008. I think the situation has always been with young people in politics, unless it's an issue that they can get involved with. We had Al Gore here recently, and Al Gore talking about saving the planet and about climate change and all that. For a lot of people, young people, that resonates. For some of the rest of us, we say, well, wait a minute, the planet has been around here a lot longer than we have. It's going to probably still be here after we're here and all that. And then you look at some of the things that people or young people do. It'd be interesting if they started cleaning up after themselves first. And this is for all people of all ages. You know, it's great to talk about we're going to fly to Mars or we're going to save the planet, but it starts with those really mundane things that I think many people don't want to do or they take for granted. Is that a fair assessment, you think? Or?
I think so, and I think that young people need to talk to their legislatures and figure out which issues they're most passionate about and bring them up. I mean, recalling this past session, the most controversial issue was the state instrument, which was a vote of 17-7.
Yeah.
That had the most no votes out of any other bill throughout this whole session. Yeah. And I think that young people need to figure out what they're passionate about and talk to their legislatures and pressure the legislatures to consider the issues that they're concerned about. I think that's part of the reason why young people don't get involved, maybe. You know, things like collective bargaining or procurement. It's hard for a young college student to understand those issues and get involved.
Well, it's hard for older people too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think that the legislature is more open and more available for anybody, young or old, that wants to get more information or find out what's going on?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's amazing about our state is the website for the legislature. It's awesome. Anybody who has an email, which I believe now, probably in kindergarten, you get an email. I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, there's some holdouts. Believe me, there's a couple of people.
You can sign up for alerts, and any issue that you keyword search will get delivered right to your inbox. So it's very easy to get involved.
Well, people know I've been a strong critic of government in many areas, but I've always said, watching the development of our website, thank God it wasn't done by CGI in Canada, like the Health Connector and all that. But it is a good website. It's gotten better. It makes it easier for people to navigate, and that's a good idea, because some of the things that we do, we make our own rules here. We waive our own rules. We exempt ourselves from our rules, and sometimes we break our rules.
Right.
But the website does make it a lot easier for people to follow, and that is a good thing. And we've been seeing more people come down, although they're part of AARP or they're part of OHA or they're part of this group or that group, but there's nothing wrong with that. They come down and they're spending more time down here. It's a pity that you've got to spend, from January till the end of April down at the legislature, but it does pay dividends in that you make personal contacts with your legislator. And by the way, this is really the time to talk to people, right, when we're not in session. We're not going to be sitting around twiddling our thumbs. We still have meetings, we still have hearings, we still meet with constituents and all that. So if you want to talk to a legislator, just meet the legislator. This is the time to do it. Well, you two have talked so much, we're running out of time. So is there anything you want to leave us with, Tim?
Well, I just want to resound what you were saying earlier, which is, you're one in the minority in the Senate here, and I think the people of Hawaii really needed to look up to you and be brave and emulate you and be brave and come down. They can come down as individuals and partake in this process, and they can get involved.
Isn't that silly, though? We got to say be brave to come down to legislature. Hey,
come down.
The folks out there control the legislature. They pay for everything that we do. And I think somewhere along the line, people have lost that feeling of just how much power they have. But we'll try to work and get it back again. Noelani?
I think it's extremely important that people understand the legislative process and how a bill becomes a law and where they can submit their testimony and how to do it. During the special session, I had a lot of people question, oh, how many votes are there? How do I submit testimony? How do I do this? I think it's extremely important that people figure out how to do this and then find issues that they're interested in and get involved so they can come down here and see what actually happens.
You actually were part of a video that was made by another one of our staffers, Kimberly, on how a bill becomes a law and all that, right?
So it's called Life of a Bill.
Where can they see that?
They can see that on YouTube. They just look up Life of a Bill by Hawaii Senate Informer. We also have a Facebook group called Hawaii Senate Informer where we put information about the legislative process and different bills and where we are in the legislative session.
Well, thank you both not only for your service and what you've done, but also for your community outreach and the things that you're going to do. So Noelani and Timothy, my pleasure. And thank you for joining us on A Better Day. We'll keep you informed, but if you need anything, call our office. And again, thank you for tuning in. Aloha.